Say, tag, you're it, diaper's yours. Thank you, Robert, for that reminder that when it comes to momming, sometimes the who is just as important as the what. So we look at that again as Jeanette Colby joins us and speaks about her trek up the American ladder of success and her realization that through it all, it's her mother's hands grabbing onto each rung. Here's her story, Hands Like Hers.
I once yelled at her, "I don't want to end up with your hands." She very rarely asked me to do the dishes or the housework, but when she did, I made sure she knew I wasn't happy about it. I knew right after I had said the words, I had stung her. Like most young American teenagers, I was self-absorbed with clothes, boys, and Madonna. My mother at the time, in her late 30s, had rough hands and arms and the scars of a young woman who grew up in rural Mexico and then worked as a live-in maid. I knew the other girls my age were given household chores, getting gold stars under the family chart, or a monthly allowance as a reward for checking off the box of responsibility. But I don't think my mother saw it this way. She grew up in the town of Sabinas, Coahuila, Mexico, where as a child, she would travel with her family to pick cotton under the summer sun. She wore a long sleeve dress and a wide brim hat to protect her skin. She and her sisters worked to earn the money they needed to buy school books and clothes for the year. When I was a child, my mom and dad would take my younger sister and I on summer road trips to Dallas or Houston, Texas, where we would go on the roller coasters and bumper cars at Six Flags and Astroworld. My mother would make us wear the same color shirts and shorts so she could create enduring memories for years to come. I just thought it was so I could complain about it for years to come as we look back at our family photos. She was an orphan by age 12. Her mother died in a fire and her father in a car accident a few years before. She was one of the oldest of 5 sisters, so it fell on her to travel to the United States for work to send money home. Her eldest sister married at 16, staying behind to raise the youngest girls. My mother came to the United States at 14 on a 3-day pass, an 8th grade education, and a dream. When I was 12, the furthest I traveled from my middle-class home in the suburbs of San Antonio was only a few blocks. I would ride up and down the hills of my neighborhood on my yellow Schwinn bike and park near my favorite trees to write poetry. And as most mothers do, she often puts her daughters ahead of her own needs. She made sure we had the prettiest clothes and shoes to wear to church and school. I'd later learn that the best gifts my mother got as a child came in small paper bags where she would find oranges, socks, and candy. As Spanish was my mother's first language, she learned much of her English vocabulary right along with me at every grade and class. We had a favorite book, Mexicali Soup, a story about a mother cooking for her family who were all trying to fit into a new city, only to have each family member ask that an ingredient be taken out of the soup until they sat in front of the bowl with nothing but water. I had often had to write my mother's checks or correct her language when she didn't make sense to the strangers at the grocery store. When I grew up, I wished that I would be more like the other mothers that spoke with power and were always heard by others around them. I didn't know that her sisters had shamed my mother for not teaching me how to communicate with them in Spanish, since English was my first language. As a young Mexican immigrant woman growing up alone in San Antonio, Texas, she endured constant harassment and derogatory slurs. I once told my mother in a clothing store not to speak in Spanish, so we wouldn't attract the attention of the salespeople on the floor. Then I turned 18. I was lured by the call of a drug called Young and in Love, And without any remorse, I dropped out of my first semester of community college and hopped into my boyfriend's car to head north. The entire family tried to talk me out of it, but I wouldn't listen. I don't even remember saying goodbye to my mother. But always, with just a phone call, she was there. I lived in my new city of Rochester, New York, and tried to figure out my place in the world. I didn't experience the xenophobia my mother lived through, but my new city wasn't without its brackish behavior. At the time, the only Mexican restaurant in the area was called Chi-Chi's, a word that I understood to mean in Mexican slang for breast. If I took my time with something, it was okay because people said that Texans did things slow. People didn't understand why I didn't speak with an accent or often asked me if I had grown up on a ranch. And at the same time, my lighter shade of skin color gave me an advantage, yet my maiden name, Bettis, didn't automatically score me a job interview. I walked into a Galveston's Texas bar and grill and got the job on the spot because, well, I was from Texas. I would always call my mother when I needed her. In the days before the mobile phone, she set up a 1-800 number for me just in case. One day I called to tell her that I was pregnant. On the other side of the country, my mother kept going. Already a United States citizen, she was a leader in the church community, and she used her hands to become a sought-after cook and tamale maker. She did so well that she became a test chef for a fast food chain and later opened her own catering business. I'd become a Mexican-American teenage mother in my part of the world, starting my life without a college degree, and many thought a statistic destined to struggle throughout life. But I never saw it this way. I now see that my mother had taught me the value of education and learning. I had been a hostess, a retail cashier, a terrible waitress, a telemarketer, and an advertising assistant. I had earned all of my own scars. Always going and moving forward, I went to college part-time while raising a family, and all the while working my way up the ladder at a daily newspaper. Today, I work in communications and in higher education for one of the nation's top research universities. In 2020, I became a first-time grandmother to Vincent. As it turned out, I have always had my mother's hands. I just use them to work in different ways, as a daughter, as a mother, and as a writer.